Let me ask you how cold the winter gets for crypto then, because, you used to look on the social feeds of the crypto community and see plenty of memes about money printing by central banks. Well, that money printer isn't quite whirring in the way it used to be. So how difficult does it get for crypto assets?
Well, it's a tale of an idiosyncratic crypto element and an overall macro element. I think what's been interesting this year, and you've commented on it a little bit already, since the beginning of the year, sort of a maturation of this asset class when it started to trade. Bitcoin traded, as all intents and purposes, like a NASDAQ stock. So I think that started to change the way in which the market looked at this asset class. You could see the institutionalization happening. It's not a retail asset class anymore. And so the macro backdrop is really affecting us just as it's affecting every other asset class, just as we've seen in your graph there. What does that look like going forward? How cold does this winter get? Well, I think it's highly dependent on the macro situation, the Fed, policymakers in Europe, policymakers in the UK. Now, idiosyncratic crypto elements, we've seen plenty. You've reported on plenty over the last few months. We think the leverage is out of this system now, for the most part. We don't see any massive shoes to drop. We saw a hack last week, yet another hack on a bridge. Will we see that kind of thing again? Probably. Will that really materially affect this asset class?
Okay.
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so a lot depends on the macro and on the regulation, and you've talked quite positively about the EU legislation that we've seen to this point, and maybe the US, maybe the UK are behind on this one. What is it that's attractive about what the European Union has done here?
Well, look, I think the EU's just made a huge step forward last week. Just Wednesday, the EU Council effectively locked in stone the text for what's called MiCA or MiCA, the Markets in Crypto Assets Regulation. Now, why is that so significant? 27 states across the entire 330 million population bloc have agreed finally, after a long time and a lot of uncertainty over when this would happen, on the text. And that means that roughly, towards the end of this year, early next year, we'll see that get ratified and go into the official register or official journal. And then in 2024, we're going to see the opportunity for anyone who's regulated in any state to do business across the entire state. Now, this changes dramatically for corporates and businesses who are in this space, the opportunity set. And I think it does kind of catapult a little bit beyond the US, which is still fragmented, still thinking a lot about it. The SEC and the different agencies over there are still debating what to do, and there's obviously a political element there.
Yeah.
Quietly, the EU has gone forward and created something that gives us certainty going forward.
Okay, Matt, jump in.
What happened to NFTs, Tim? I mean, non-fungible tokens were the hottest thing from musicians to Bored Apes, and the values seem to have just dived even further than the rest of the crypto space. Are they coming back?
Well, look, the NFTs, just like a lot of elements in this space, they go, there's boom and bust cycles. There was a lot of activity in this last year, as everybody knows. An awful lot of money flowed into the sector, a lot of celebrities getting behind it, and that always causes a little bit of energy in the space. Now, of course, that's deflated now. We've seen NFT prices in general go down pretty materially. What we're seeing, though, on the back end of this, and this is actually true in non-FT crypto markets too, NFT crypto markets, we're seeing institutional adoption. So we're seeing big brands, luxury brands come into the space. There's a lot of talk of the metaverse. We're in the collision of the metaverse and NFTs. And what we're seeing in the background is some projects that really, we believe, in the next couple of years are going to kind of bring this back to the fore, but with something a little bit more tangible, something that's more experiential, something that really touches the consumer in a different way. So yeah, we do see in the long run a more sort of constructive backdrop to the NFT story. Matt.
Tim, you've mentioned institutional adoption a few times now, how it is larger institutional players now in the space versus just retail as it was before. And I'm wondering if that may be why we have seen these assets so range-bound for months now. If you look at a chart of the Bloomberg Galaxy Crypto Index or just one of Bitcoin, I mean, for about 4 months since mid-June, it has been essentially a straight line with very little movement up and down. Do you expect that volatility will come back into this asset class, or is that institutional play there a stabilizer?
Well, look, I think it's definitively a stabilizer, and if you look at the chart that's up there right now, you'll see there was the material downswing we had around about the Terra Luna collapse. Interesting to note that when that happened, perhaps somewhat counterintuitively, we saw a big onboarding demand from big institutions, big traditional hedge funds, banks, asset managers, endowments, pension funds, and we're still working through that backlog of onboarding. Now, why would that be? You might think that as prices went down, they'd think, oh, hang on, let's step back. Well, no. they've been working on this for a long time. This is arguably a better entry point. So yes, you are seeing more institutional participation in the space. It has created a two-way market. I think also notable is the derivatives market, a real barometer of the growth of any asset class is how significant the volumes end up being in derivatives. We're probably the biggest balance sheet in derivatives in the world for crypto derivatives, and we're seeing healthy two-way flow across the board. Now, that's growing. Let's not over-egg the pudding. That's growing. But in terms of volatility, back to where we started, depends on what we see from a macro perspective. And look, there's always that idiosyncratic component. But yeah, it's going to come back. And I think, look, we're seeing the hedge funds trade healthily right now. They're making money in the same way that they're making things like Frontier FX and Frontier Rates at the moment. It's very much the same idea.